On the night of my 40th anniversary, I lifted the teacup. The instant the jasmine hit my nose, I knew I was being set up. My daughter-in-law whispered, "Drink it, Mom." But her hand trembled. She knew the waiter was standing by, waiting for my signal. I didn't scream. I just calmly raised my hand to call him over. If you want to know why I was calm before the storm, listen close. I started preparing for this night 6 months ago. My name is Martha Ellison. I am 68 years old, a widow, and I live alone in the quiet, manicured town of Brookhaven, Westridge. Tonight, I was supposed to be celebrating my 40th wedding anniversary. Celebrating it, of course, with the ghost of my husband, Arthur, and the two people who were actively trying to replace him in my legal affairs, my son, Evan, and his wife, Tara. The restaurant was the Lantern and Laurel, the kind of place that prides itself on low lighting and heavy silverware. The warm, amber lights did little to warm the table. A muted jazz trio played in the corner, the saxophone sliding smoothly over the tension. Evan and Tara sat opposite me, performing their well-rehearsed play titled The Happy Concerned Family. Evan, bless his heart, never was a good actor. He talked too loudly about his recent sales figures, his fork scraping his plate with nervous energy. Tara, however, was a professional. She was all quiet solicitude, her eyes bright and fixed on me, complimenting my pearl necklace with a sincerity that felt manufactured. "It's just so wonderful we can be here for you tonight." "Martha," she said, her voice a soft purr. "It is lovely, dear," I replied, smoothing the napkin in my lap. The main event arrived, not on a platter, but in a delicate ceramic pot. Diego, the senior waiter whom I had spoken to 3 days prior, approached the table. "The jasmine tea, Mrs. Ellison," he said, his face impassive as he set it down. Before he could even lift his hand toward the cups, Tara's was already on the pot. "Oh, let me," she insisted, flashing a brilliant smile at me. "The first cup, for the guest of honor?" She poured. Her movements were almost graceful, but I watched her left hand, the one shielded from Evan's view. I watched the way her thumb and forefinger pinched together just above the cup's rim for a fraction of a second, a motion so swift it would be missed by anyone not looking for it. She pushed the cup toward me. "Drink it while it's hot, Mum. It will warm you up." I smiled. I lifted the cup, but not to my lips. I brought it just below my nose and inhaled, letting the fragrant steam rise. The jasmine was there. Yes, but beneath it was something else. A faint, sharp, acrid note, like bitter almonds or pulverized chalk. It was the scent of betrayal, and as I tilted the cup slightly under the candlelight, I saw it. Not a smudge, not a lipstick mark, but a tiny, faint dusting of fine white powder clinging to the porcelain rim, just where her fingers had hovered. It was the exact detail I had instructed Diego to watch for. I did not gasp. I did not drop the cup. I held Tara's gaze, my smile fixed and pleasant. Then, I calmly, deliberately, raised my right hand into the air, catching Diego's eye as he stood by the service station. "Waiter, please," I called out, my voice perfectly level. Evan, who had been launching into a story about his car, stopped mid-sentence. I saw the blood drain from Tara's face. Her knuckles turned white as she gripped the silver dessert spoon by her plate. Her paper-thin smile was still there, but it had frozen, a grotesque mask of pleasantry. Diego was at my side instantly. Yes, Mrs. Ellison. I'm afraid I'll need a new cup, I said, pushing the tainted one gently toward him. And please, be a dear and have the kitchen seal this pot. That is the restaurant's safety protocol for a compromised beverage, isn't it? The word compromised hung in the air. I watched the silent, panicked look that passed between Tara and Evan. This was not in their script. This was where the lead actress had just forgotten her lines and the set was catching fire. Evan started to bluster. Mum, what's wrong? It's just tea. I ignored him. I looked directly at Tara, whose eyes were wide with a fear she could no longer conceal. This, I said, tapping my fingernail lightly on the table for emphasis, is not the first time tonight I've seen that substance in my tea. The storm had been brewing for 6 months. It started not with a bang, but with a phone call. Evan? His voice was strained when he mentioned a sudden, massive rent hike at their apartment. Just for a few months, Mum, he'd pleaded. Just until we get back on our feet. I loved my son, so I opened my door. I should have kept the chain on. Tara arrived with a performance of overwhelming gratitude, but her eyes were cold. They scanned my living room, my furniture, the silver frames on the mantel. It was not the gaze of a guest. It was the gaze of an appraiser. Within a week, the adjustments began. The television volume was always too loud for her. The way I cooked my pot roast, a recipe my Arthur had loved, was apparently inefficient. She took a keen, unsettling interest in my medication schedule, offering to organize my pill caddy. You might forget a dose, Martha, she'd say, her smile never quite reaching those calculating eyes. What Tara didn't know, what Evan had clearly forgotten, was that I hadn't spent 30 years at Northbridge Civic Works just filing papers. I was in the internal compliance division. My entire career was built on recognizing patterns, documenting procedural breaches, and understanding the meticulous process of building a case. I didn't just retire. I brought my skills home with me. The first red flag was small. Papers in my study drawer, the one that always sticks, were out of order. Then came the emails. Notifications to my inbox at 3 a.m, thanking me for requesting a one-time password for my primary savings account. I had not requested any password. I immediately changed every lock in the house, including the one on my study, and activated 2-factor authentication on every account I owned. A few days later, I was watering my hydrangeas when my neighbour, Delia Porter, leaned over the fence. She was 72 and sharp as a tack. Be careful, Martha, she'd said quietly, not looking at me, but at the roses. I had my son-in-law help me with my finances once. He helped me right out of my retirement fund. She pressed a business card into my hand. Grant Whitmore, attorney at law. That night, I opened a new, leather-bound journal. I began my log. It wasn't a diary. It was an evidence file. Date, time, subject. I documented every adjustment Tara suggested. I wrote down direct quotes, noting if Evan was present as a witness. I took photographs of my desk and drawers every morning before I left the house and compared them to new photos when I returned. The logbook confirmed my suspicions, but I needed definitive proof. I purchased a miniature camera, the kind disguised as a USB charger, and plugged it into the outlet facing my study desk. I forgot my purse on the chair when I left for my weekly grocery run. When I returned, I watched the footage. It was chillingly efficient. Tara waited exactly 2 minutes after she heard my car pull away. She entered my study, went directly to my purse, and pulled out my wallet. She didn't take cash. She took out my bank statement from the side pocket and, using her phone, photographed it, front and back. I wasn't angry. I was cold. I felt the old, familiar click of the compliance officer taking over. The target was identified. The breach was confirmed. I moved my real checkbooks, my passport, and my active cards to a new safe deposit box the next day. I left bait. I put an old, long deactivated credit card back in my wallet. I printed a new, fake bank statement with an inflated balance, folded it, and put it in a new envelope. On that envelope, I placed a tiny, invisible UV watermark. I finally understood. This wasn't the awkwardness of a family living under one roof. This wasn't generational friction. This was a calculated, deliberate campaign of elder financial abuse. My son and his wife were not guests. They were predators, and I would no longer be their victim. I would be the one setting the trap. I decided to test the waters. I had already changed the locks on my study, and the tension in the house was palpable. Over dinner, Evan kept shooting me strained looks. "Mom, are you feeling all right?" he finally asked. "You seem suspicious." Tara, playing the role of the gentle peacemaker, added, "Martha, we are just worried. You seem to be locking doors. We want you to feel safe." "I do want to feel safe," I replied, setting my fork down carefully. That is why I was so concerned when I received a security alert. Someone tried to log into my email at 2:13 in the morning last Tuesday. Evan let out an exasperated sigh. "Mum, that's called spam. Everyone gets those. You're letting this paranoia get the best of you. It's just old age." "It is just a misunderstanding, I am sure," Tara said, her voice smooth as silk. "You know how confusing all this technology can be." "Perhaps," I said, looking directly at her. "But you are right to be concerned about security, especially with these smaller banks." Tara nodded, sensing an agreement. "Exactly. You really should not be using those little regional places. The security at banks like Brookhaven Trust, for example, is just terrible. Anyone could probably guess their way in." There it was. The slip. The fake bank statement I had left in my purse, the one I had watched her photograph on my hidden camera, was from Brookhaven Trust. I had never once spoken that bank's name aloud in this house. I met with Grant Whitmore the following afternoon. He was a tall, quiet man who listened without interruption, his hands steepled. As I laid out my logbook and the USB drive with the camera footage, "Martha, your instincts are impeccable," he said, his voice grave. "But my advice is this: do not accuse. Do not confront them. They will only lie, and it will force them underground. We need them to expose themselves so completely that there is no room for denial. Give them the rope, and they will do the work for us." I followed his advice precisely. That day, I revoked the old, simple medical power of attorney I had signed for Evan 5 years prior. I opened a new temporary trust account at a different institution, one with stringent protocols. Any unusual transaction, any attempt to change beneficiaries, required my physical presence and a specific verbal password derived from my late husband's service number. Back home, the atmosphere soured. I was no longer just defending, I was actively gathering evidence. I purchased a small ultraviolet light and a set of harmless, invisible marking pens. I tagged the edge of my real jewelry box, the spine of my checkbook, and the handle of my filing cabinet. I would check them nightly for the smudged, glowing fingerprints of unauthorized access. As I secured my assets, Evan shifted tactics. He became the concerned son, the one burdened by my vulnerability. He sat with me while I watched the evening news, his hand heavy on my arm. "Mum, we were talking," he said, avoiding my eyes. "You are all alone in this big house. What if you fell? What if you got sick? We really think we should get my name onto the deed for the house, just to make things easier, you know, for protection." Protection for whom? "Evan," I asked quietly. He stammered, falling back on vague talk about probate and taxes. The proof of their next move arrived a week later. I went to use my printer and found a document still warm in the output tray. They had forgotten to retrieve it. It was a draft. A durable power of attorney. It was not a medical directive. It was a sweeping, complex financial authorization. And it gave Tara, not Evan, complete and immediate control over every asset I owned. I took the pages straight to Delia. She read them, her lips thinning with contempt. "Martha, this is bad, but it is also incredibly sloppy." She pointed to 2 clauses. "This waiver here is not legally valid in Westridge, and this signatory line is formatted for a corporate entity, not a personal trust. A real lawyer did not draft this." "But," she said, looking up at me, "someone thinks they know the law. Someone is coaching her. They had an accomplice. I needed to flush them all out at once." That evening, I made a phone call while I knew Tara was in the hallway, ostensibly vacuuming. I spoke loudly, as if to my accountant. "Yes, that is correct. I am finalizing the new will. We will meet next week to sign everything. The old arrangements are completely void. I want it all settled." In the hallway, the vacuum cleaner abruptly shut off. The bait was set. Grant called our next meeting a containment strategy. I called it setting a trap with 3 layers of reinforced steel. "They are amateurs. Martha," he said, tapping his pen on the file. "Amateurs are predictable. They will escalate, and they will get sloppy. We will use that. Layer 1 is the bank. Layer 2 is the notary. Layer 3 is the anniversary dinner." The bank layer was already active. My assets were locked down tight. Grant had formalized my instructions with the bank's fraud department. Absolutely no changes to beneficiaries, no withdrawals over $500, and no wire transfers. Period. Any such request required my physical presence and the secret passcode I had established. The trap was set. We just needed them to walk into it. Layer 2 was the notary. "They failed with the printer draft," Grant explained. "So they'll try to get you in front of a live notary with a new, corrected document. We will control that environment." He arranged it all. We booked a fake appointment for the day before my anniversary at a legitimate office. Horizon Notary. I was to sign a full power of attorney. But the notary public and Grant's own legal associate would be the only ones there, briefed and waiting for a no-show. Or better, for Tara to show up alone on my behalf. Layer 3 was the restaurant, the Lantern and Laurel. This was my stage, and I was directing the final act. I met with Diego, the waiter, who had worked there for 15 years and had served Arthur and me on countless birthdays. I did not tell him the whole story. I did not need to. I told him I was having a serious security issue with my family regarding my medication. "I need your help, Diego," I said, sliding a crisp $100 bill across the table. He slid it back. For Mr. Ellison, I will do this for free, he said. We established the rule of the teacup. He, and only he, would handle my beverages. He would bring a fresh, sealed pot for every cup I requested. The cup itself would be delivered with a small, clear thermal sticker over the lid, the kind kitchens use to verify food temperatures. If that seal is broken or changes color before it reaches me, I instructed, you will know it has been touched. Grant handled the legal framework, but I managed the physical evidence. I went online and purchased a set of rapid response testing strips, the kind parents use. They were completely legal and sold over the counter, designed to detect common adulterants, high levels of caffeine, antihistamines, or respiratory sedatives. I was not expecting arsenic. I was expecting something to make me confused, drowsy, and compliant. Something to make an old woman's signature shaky but valid. I needed to prove what it was. Not just that it was. My compliance training also meant sweeping for unauthorized surveillance. The night after Evan mentioned the house deed, I changed the Wi-Fi password. I then took a small bug detector, a relic from my old career, and swept my study. The alarm was silent until I passed the wall outlet behind my desk. Tucked inside the plastic housing of a 3-pronged adapter was a tiny micro SD card. I put the card into my laptop. The contents made my blood run cold. It was not audio. It was pictures. Dozens of photos of my private savings book. Close-ups of my signature from old letters. And then, file after file of practice signatures. Tara's handwriting, looping and striving to match my own. Over and over. They were not just planning to trick me. They were planning to become me. This changed everything. Now. The final layer of my personal trap was necessary. I bought a simple pen. To the naked eye, it wrote in clear, normal ink. But the ink itself was a specific chemical compound. I took out the one document Grant had prepared for me, a simple, harmless revocation of all prior wills, which he was holding in escrow, and I signed it with that pen. They were bringing paper to the dinner. I was bringing paper. But only my paper, under an ultraviolet light, would glow a brilliant, incriminating blue. The trap was complete. The first layer of the trap snapped shut on a Wednesday morning. The call came from my bank's regional fraud manager. He informed me that Layer 1, the automated security protocol Grant and I had established, had been triggered. Someone attempted to file a change of beneficiary form for your primary trust, Mrs. Ellison, the manager said, his voice crisp and professional. It was rejected, of course, due to the verbal passcode requirement, but the attempt itself was interesting. How so? I asked, gripping the receiver. It came via email, from an address designed to mimic yours. They used Martha Wyson, with 2 capital I's instead of the L's, a common spoofing tactic. Where did the email originate? I asked. Not from your home IP address. We traced it. It came from a public use terminal at a co-working space downtown. This was not an impulsive grab for my checkbook. This was premeditated. Tara, or her accomplice, had left the house, gone to a neutral location, and attempted a sophisticated identity theft. I relayed this to Delia while we were pruning the azaleas that border our properties. She paused, snippers in hand. You know, Martha, she said, I've seen her leave a few afternoons, not in her regular clothes. She wears a uniform, dark blue, silver limo stitched on the breast. A limousine service. It fit perfectly. It gave her access to the city, to places like co-working spaces, and to a network of other drivers, other people. It explained the sloppy legal draft of the power of attorney. It had the whiff of break-room law, advice cobbled together by someone who thought they were clever. Grant Whitmore took that thread and pulled. What he found was the engine driving the entire train. He ran a civil records check. Tara Ellison did not exist 4 years ago. She had legally changed her name 3 years prior, just before meeting Evan. Her previous name was linked to a string of default judgments and a massive consumer debt lawsuit she had lost. Tara was not just opportunistic. She was desperate, drowning in tens of thousands of dollars of debt. But Grant was not finished. He found the real twist, the one that explained my son's nervous, sweaty-palmed anxiety. "It is not just her debt, Martha," Grant said, his voice soft. "I checked the guarantee on her largest defaulted loan. Evan co-signed it. He guaranteed it 6 months ago, right before they moved in with you. He is just as trapped as she is. They are both on the hook, and they are about to go under." My son. He was not just a weak-willed fool being manipulated by a predatory woman. He was a willing participant, chained to her debt. And they were dragging themselves toward my front door, intending to use my assets as their lifeboat. His agitation, his sudden obsession with getting his name on my deed, it was the raw terror of a man about to lose everything. Now I understood the stakes. They were not trying to build a nest egg. They were trying to plug a sinking ship, and their desperation would make them escalate. I had to let them. I sat at my computer, knowing full well they were likely monitoring my network activity, and I wrote an email to Evan. My fingers did not tremble. "Evan," I wrote, "I have been thinking about what you said. You are right. I am getting older, and I need to think about the future and the legal safety of the house. This anniversary dinner for your father is the perfect time. Let's finally settle this. Please bring whatever papers you feel are necessary, and we can sign them after dessert." I pressed send. The bait was in the water. I made 2 more calls. The first was to Pastor Caldwell, who had officiated my wedding to Arthur 40 years ago. I invited him to be my guest at the Lantern and Laurel, at the table next to mine. "It is a hard night, Pastor," I said. "I would just feel better having a friend of Arthur's nearby." He agreed instantly. He would be my moral anchor, my witness. My second call was to the restaurant manager. I explained that I had a severe security concern regarding my son and his wife. We agreed upon a set of signals. If I raised my napkin and placed it on the table once, it meant change the teapot immediately. If I raised it twice, it meant summon the manager to the table. If I raised it 3 times, he was to call the Brookhaven Police Department. I was ready. I felt no malice, only a cold sense of necessity. I was prepared to face them, and I would ensure that this remained, as it should, a conflict only between adults. The night of the anniversary dinner arrived. The performance began the moment I sat down. Tara was effusive, commenting on my dress, how the colour made me look so young. Evan was the opposite, quiet, jumpy, his eyes fixed on the briefcase resting by his feet. He kept clearing his throat and talking in circles about legacy and legal safety for the future. I allowed the conversation to drift, playing the part of the slightly sentimental, slightly frail widow. I ordered my tea. Diego, his face a perfect mask of professional calm, brought the sealed pot and the cup with the thermal sticker, just as we had practiced. I spoke about Arthur, I brought up a memory of our trip to the Grand Canyon, forcing them to listen, forcing them to nod and smile. I watched Tara out of the corner of my eye. Her patience was wearing thin. She needed the ceremony to end so the real transaction could begin. I deliberately let the conversation lull. I took a slow sip of water. "I am feeling a little tired," I murmured. This was her cue. "Mum, you just need to relax," she said, her voice dripping with false concern. "Let me freshen up your tea." She reached for the pot. Her back was partially to Diego, who was at the next table, but his eyes were on us in the reflection of a silver serving tray. As Tara poured, her left hand again hovered over the cup. From a tiny, clear plastic shell concealed in her palm, she dropped a small, white tablet. It dissolved instantly. Diego saw it. With a masterful, practiced move, he stumbled, dropping a clean napkin onto the floor near my chair. As he bent to retrieve it, he slid the small, empty bread plate onto the tray stand, directly under the restaurant's brightest service light, catching the faint, powdery residue that had missed the cup. At the same time, I looked at the lid of my cup. The thermal sticker, which had been clear, was now blooming with a faint, telltale blue. The adulterant had triggered the heat-sensitive dye. The trap was sprung. I did not touch the cup. I held Tara's gaze, my expression unchanging, and I raised my hand. "Waiter, please, I would like a new cup. I believe I am allergic to something strange in this one." Evan, mistaking my request for a simple complaint, saw his opening. He panicked, thinking the night was slipping away. He grabbed his briefcase, pulled out a thick sheaf of papers, and shoved them across the table, knocking over his water glass. "Mom, just sign this first," he said, his voice high and strained. "Just sign it before you get your tea, so it's done. It is just for our protection." He pushed a pen toward me. I looked at the papers, then at him. I pretended my hand was shaking. A frail old woman. "Oh, dear," I said, my voice trembling. My hands are unsteady. "Diego," I called out. "Could you help me? I need a clear signature. Do you happen to have one of those ultraviolet lights in the kitchen, the kind you use to check for counterfeit bills? It would help me see the line." Tara's smile froze. The manager, who had been alerted by Diego, brought the small UV light. He switched it on. "Of course, Mrs. Ellison." I held the pen Evan had given me over his documents. Nothing. The paper was blank under the light. Then, I pulled my own document, the simple will revocation, from my purse and clicked my special pen. I scribbled on the corner. Under the UV light, the ink flared a brilliant, electric blue. I placed Evan's blank, worthless papers next to my own glowing, valid signature. I set my pen down. "Evan?" "Tara, it appears you have failed the first test." My voice did not waver. "Manager," I called out, my hand still raised. "If you would please come over here." This was the second signal. The manager, a tall man named Mr. Harrison, whom I had briefed earlier, was at our table in an instant. As he arrived, two figures rose from a nearby table by the window. Pastor Caldwell, his face a mask of gentle concern, and Maya, my young neighbour from 3 doors down. "Oh, Martha," Maya said, her voice pitched with perfect surprise. "Is everything all right? Pastor and I were just leaving and we saw the commotion." Tara's eyes darted between the new arrivals, her panic escalating. She was trapped in the spotlight. "Mrs. Ellison, you requested my assistance. Mr. Harrison asked formally. Before I could answer, Diego stepped forward. He was holding the small white bread plate he had used to catch the powder. Sir, he said to the manager, when the teapot was opened by the guest, this substance was dropped near the cup. As per our protocol, I have secured it. Mr. Harrison nodded gravely. He produced a clear plastic evidence bag from his pocket. He carefully slid the plate inside and sealed it. This will be held for testing. Restaurant policy is absolute on matters of guest safety. An excellent policy, a new voice said. A man stood up from the table where Pastor Caldwell had been sitting. It was Grant Whitmore. He walked over, his briefcase in hand. Tara looked at him, confused, but Evan's face turned ashen. He recognized him from the one time he had tried to contest his father's will. Mr. Harrison, Grant said, handing the manager a card. My name is Grant Whitmore. I am Mrs. Ellison's legal counsel. I am here tonight as her guest. Given the circumstances, I must formally request a full internal incident report regarding the contamination of this beverage. Of course, Counselor, the manager replied. Mum, what is this? Evan burst out, his voice cracking. This is insane. You have set us up. On the contrary, Evan, I said. I picked up my phone from the table. You set yourselves up. I believe you recognize my study. I pressed play. The screen was illuminated with the crystal-clear footage from the hidden camera. We all watched the silent film Tara entering my study, checking the hallway, and then quickly removing my bank statement from my purse and photographing it with her phone. The footage continued, showing her hands running over my jewelry box, testing the lock. That is my private office, I said. That's nothing, Tara hissed, finding her voice. I was looking for a stamp. Were you also looking for a stamp when you did this? I tapped the screen, switching to a new file. It was the bank's security log. This is the rejection notice from my bank's fraud department from 4 days ago. An attempt to change the beneficiary on my trust. It was sent from a public computer terminal downtown. I looked at Tara. Your shift log from Silver Limo, which Grant acquired this morning, places you at a drop-off 2 blocks away from that terminal at exactly 2:30 p.m., the exact time the email was sent. We were just trying to protect you. Mom, Evan stammered, his face slick with sweat. In case something happened. Grant Whitmore answered him. A durable power of attorney. Mr. Ellison, especially the one you attempted to draft, contains no provisions for protection whatsoever. It is a financial weapon. It protects no one except the person holding it. And you needed that weapon, did you not? Tara, I asked. I reached into my purse and retrieved the final document. I placed it on the table between them. It was not a legal paper. It was a public court filing, a civil judgment. This is your consumer debt statement, Tara, or should I say, Tara Holt, your name before you changed it. $58,000 in default. The motive for all this, right here in black and white. Tara looked cornered. She tried one last, desperate lie. It was just a vitamin something to help her sleep. She is always so stressed. It was a mistake. The restaurant cannot take that chance. Mr. Harrison interjected, his voice firm. We will be testing for common sedatives and illicit substances. If it is, as you say, a vitamin, you have nothing to worry about. If it is not, we will be forced to notify the authorities. I looked at my son. I looked at his wife. Their faces were a ruin of greed and failure. That was the notary, Tara. The fake appointment at Horizon Notary yesterday that you failed to attend because you were trying and failing to access my bank accounts. I shook my head. The second layer of the trap. You could not even pass that one. With the evidence laid bare on the table, Grant Whitmore reached into his briefcase. He slid a single, thick envelope across the linen to Evan. "This," Grant said, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of the law, "is a formal notice to vacate your mother's property. In accordance with West Ridge state law, given your violation of tenancy at will and illegal trespass upon her private effects, you have 30 days to remove yourselves and your belongings. After that, you will be removed by the sheriff." The mask finally shattered. Tara's face contorted, not with fear, but with pure, undiluted rage. She turned on Evan, her voice a low, vicious hiss. You were never tough enough to handle this. You were always weak. If you had just pushed her harder, she would have signed the papers at Horizon Notary yesterday afternoon, and this would all be over. It was the final, unforced error, the last piece falling into place. Grant Whitmore almost smiled. "That is fascinating, Mrs. Ellison, because I was at Horizon Notary all yesterday afternoon, waiting with their senior officer. We were so hoping you would stop by, but no one came." Tara stared at him, speechless, her lie exposed. But before she could formulate another, a shadow fell over the table. A man I had not noticed before, dressed in a slightly rumpled suit, stepped up to Tara's side. He had been sitting alone by the bar. He looked like a regional sales manager, nondescript except for his eyes, which were as dead as stones. "Evening, Tara," he said, his voice casual. He ignored all of us. "I was getting worried. You told me you'd have the payment tonight. Or, at least, the signed collateral papers I asked for." Tara turned a shade of white I had never seen on a living person. The man glanced at the mess of documents on our table, then back at her. "Looks like you are having some trouble with the paperwork." Evan looked from the man to Tara and back to the man. The realization hit him like a physical blow. This was never about their apartment. It was not about their future. It was about her past. The debt. The man at the table was not an accomplice. He was the shark she was trying to pay off. And my son was just the bait. Evan made a small, choking sound and slumped in his chair, covering his face with his hands. He was utterly broken. I looked at my son, then at his wife. "I will tell you both what I told myself 6 months ago," I said, my voice clear and cutting through the silence. "In this family, no one is allowed to starve, but also, no one is allowed to steal." The restaurant manager, Mr. Harrison, stepped forward, his face a polite mask of professional concern. "Counselor, Mrs. Ellison, I must insist, for the comfort and safety of our other guests, I need to ask that this matter be concluded. Perhaps you should all leave." "We will be happy to," I said, folding my napkin. "I trust your incident report will be thorough. Mr. Harrison, please send a copy directly to my attorney." Pastor Caldwell placed a warm, steady hand on my shoulder. He said nothing, but the pressure was enough. It was not a gesture of pity. It was one of solidarity, a moral witness confirming that this was not revenge. This was a necessary, painful amputation. as Evan slowly, dazedly, began to rise from his chair. I reached into my purse one last time. I pulled out a small, plain white envelope. I did not hand it to Tara. I placed it in front of my son. "Evan," I said. He raised his red, swollen eyes to look at me. "This is the address for the Brookhaven Community Financial Counseling Center. They offer services on a sliding scale." I pushed it toward his hand. "If you ever decide you want to walk a straight path, you can start there." The silence in the house that night was heavier than grief. It was the dense, still air after a fever breaks. Around midnight, my phone buzzed on the nightstand. A text message from Tara. It was a long, rambling paragraph of excuses, of panic, of blaming the debt collector, of begging me not to call the police, that she would do anything. I read it once. I did not feel pity. I felt the cold clarity of a surgeon who has just removed a malignancy. I typed one sentence and sent it. "My lawyer will be in touch." Then I blocked her number. The next morning, Evan was gone. He had not slept in the guest room. He had left a single, folded piece of notebook paper on the kitchen counter. It was a handwritten letter. It was sloppy, tear-stained, and full of the self-loathing I recognized. He admitted everything. He said he was weak, that he was sorry, that he was ashamed of what Tara had convinced him to do. He asked for another chance, for time. I read his letter. I folded it and placed it in the pending file in my study. I would not burn it, but I would not answer it. It was a problem for another day, perhaps in another year. For now, it would wait. Delia came over around 10, not with a casserole, but with rubber gloves and a bottle of lemon-scented cleaner. We did not talk about the night before. We simply worked. We stripped the linens from the guest room, scrubbed the surfaces Tara had touched, and opened every window in the house. The cool November air that swept through the rooms felt like an exorcism. "Freedom is not cheap, is it?" Delia remarked, wiping down the kitchen counters. "No," I said, "but it is worth the price." My focus returned to containment and recovery. Grant finalized the changes to my estate. My will was now ironclad. Everything, the house, the investments, the accounts, was placed into a secure trust. My son was not named as a beneficiary. Instead, the trust was structured to provide for my own health needs first. Any remainder, upon my death, was to be allocated to community scholarships at the local college. My legacy would be one of education, not one to be squandered by the desperate. I took care of myself. 2. I threw out the old pill caddy Tara had been so eager to organize. I signed up for the senior center's ballroom dancing class, something Arthur and I had always meant to do. I joined a Tuesday morning sewing circle. These were not distractions. They were acts of rebuilding. I was reclaiming my life, stitching it back together, one independent, self-reliant piece at a time. I also took one final, detached step. I wrote a formal letter to the corporate office of Silver Limo. It was not an emotional complaint. It was a precise, professional notification, the kind I used to write at Northbridge. I stated that one of their employees, Tara Ellison, had been present during an attempt to secure fraudulent legal documents and had used information gleaned from her work network to identify legal loopholes. I wrote, simply informing them of a potential liability to their brand's integrity. It was not revenge. It was risk management. Evan called 3 days later. I answered. The line was silent for almost a full minute. I could hear his shallow, unsteady breathing. I did not speak. I did not say his name or ask him what he wanted. I simply waited. Finally, I said, "When you are ready to walk on your own, you will know where to find me." I hung up the phone. Grant had asked me, in the calm light of his office, if I wanted to file a police report. The restaurant's test would surely come back positive for a sedative. We had the video, the bank logs, the debt motive. We had a case. Not yet, I told him. I am not a vindictive woman, but I am a pragmatic one. The 30-day eviction notice is the priority. My condition for not pressing charges is simple. They return the house keys. They do not harass me, and they are gone by the deadline. If they violate any of that, you file the report. I gave them an exit, a chance to disappear without handcuffs, but not without consequences. What none of them knew, not Evan, not Tara, not even Grant, was that the anniversary dinner was not truly over. When I had placed my napkin on the table, I had left something else behind. A small, final chess piece, waiting to be found. The night was not over until I said it was. The call from Mr. Harrison at the Lantern and Laurel came the next morning, just as I was finishing my coffee. The lab results were in, just as you suspected, Mrs. Ellison, he said, his voice clipped and professional. The rapid test on the powder residue came back positive for a mild, over-the-counter sedative. Doxylamine succinate, to be precise. Not enough to cause any serious harm, but more than enough to impair judgment, to make someone confused, drowsy. Enough to make them sign a piece of paper they should not sign. Thank you, Mr. Harrison. That is precisely what I needed to know, I said. An hour later, a courier delivered a package to Grant's office. It contained Mr. Harrison's full, signed incident report, the sealed evidence bag with the remaining powder, and a USB drive. On it was the high-definition security footage from the camera directly above my table. It captured Tara's hand, shielded from Evan, hovering over the cup. It captured the tiny, pale puff of powder as it fell. It also included signed witness statements from both Diego and Maya, confirming they had seen the action and the resulting residue. Grant did not hesitate. He compiled our entire file, the bank logs, the fake email, the forged power of attorney draft, the hidden camera footage from my study, and now, the restaurant's complete evidence package, and hand-delivered it to the Brookhaven Police Department. He did not press for an arrest. Instead, he filed a formal report, creating an official record of the attempted financial coercion. It was not a sword, it was a shield, a permanent, legal barrier that would be triggered instantly if Tara or Evan ever tried to contact or harass me again. That afternoon, Evan came. He did not come alone. As I had requested, Pastor Caldwell and Delia were already there, seated in my living room. They were my witnesses. He stood before them, his hands shaking, his eyes red. He apologized. He admitted to the pressure of the debt, to his weakness, to his shame. I listened. When he was finished, I did not offer him comfort. I offered him a contract. I handed him a single-page, notarized agreement Grant had prepared. It stipulated 3 things. First, he would attend mandatory financial counseling for no less than 6 months. Second, he would legally sever all financial ties and co-signed debts with Tara. Third, he would have no access, direct or indirect, to any of my assets or property, now or in the future. He read it. He signed it. Tara arrived an hour later, alone. Her demeanor was no longer panicked. It was cold, appraising, manipulative. She tried to negotiate. "Martha, we can work this out," she began. "If you could just help with this one loan." I held up my hand, stopping her. "There is nothing to negotiate," I said. "This entire sordid affair involved only adults. No children were harmed. No children were witness. And I will do whatever it takes to ensure it stays that way. You will leave our lives. That is the only arrangement." She understood the unstated threat. She understood that I was protecting the future of my family from her. Her final checkmate came not from me, but from the state, the police, acting on Grant's comprehensive report, called Tara in for a formal warning. A detective laid out the case for her, the tampering of a beverage, the intent to defraud, the conspiracy. It was not a charge, he explained. It was a courtesy. The next time her name crossed his desk in relation to mine, it would be for prosecution. The 30th day arrived. Evan and Tara had been staying in a cheap motel by the interstate. He came alone to sign the final eviction papers. He set his house key on the small wooden tray by my front door. It landed with a dry, metallic clink. It was the sound of a door locking for the last time. It was the sound of an ending. That evening, I returned to the Lantern and Laurel. I sat at the same table. The small anniversary candle from the night of the party was still there. Diego approached, a warm, professional smile on his face. "The usual, Mrs. Ellison?" he asked. "Yes, Diego," I said. "The jasmine tea. But tonight, no one touches it but me." He brought the pot, sealed and safe. I poured the fragrant, steaming liquid into the cup. I took my wallet from my purse and looked at the small, faded photograph of Arthur I kept tucked inside. I smiled. "I told you, Arthur," I whispered. "I am not the woman who can be pushed anymore." I raised the cup in a silent toast to him, to myself. Then, I leaned forward and blew out the candle. Thank you for listening to my story. I would love to know where you are all listening from, so please drop a comment below and share your thoughts. Do not forget to subscribe to Grandma's Family Diary, like this video, and hit that hype button so more people can hear this story.